Hi guys, and thanks very much for joining me. Now, today's lesson, we're going to start looking at the importance of religion in medieval England. So that's going to be your title in your notes, please. Make sure you put that as your title. Pause the video if you need to for a moment to add that. Make sure you've underlined it, and then we're going to move on. So the first thing we're going to look at is a picture, and it's called a doom painting. Now, you've got it in front of you now on the screen. And it's a picture that you would have seen in a medieval church. Now, what I want you to do, I want you to look at that picture, and I want you to try and work out what is it showing you? Why do you think that picture is going to be shown in a church? And why are pictures important in this period? So again, just pause it for a moment, look at a picture, and see what you come up with. So, hopefully you've spent a bit of time looking at this. So what do you think it's showing? Well, at the top of the picture we can see figures with wings, and we can see steps rising upwards. So perhaps they look like angels, and perhaps there are people going up these steps or up this ladder up to somewhere different with clouds and angels waiting for them. And then at the bottom of the picture we can see figures with horns, fire, and maybe with spikes and things like that. And they seem to be almost torturing the people. So what we call it is a doom painting, and at the top it's showing heaven, and at the bottom it's showing hell. So that leads us on to this second question: why do you think it's in a church? Well, what it's doing is showing what happens to people when they die. If you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you'll go to hell. Now, the next question, final question, why are pictures important in this period? And it's to now start thinking about, could people in medieval times read and write? And the answer to that is no, a lot of them couldn't. And so pictures were often a way that they would learn what would happen to them, or they'd learn about things in general. So pictures were really important in this period. This one is called a doom painting. Now today we're going to start looking at the role of the medieval church. So let's have a look at religious beliefs. And I want you to make a subheading in your notes for this, religious beliefs. Again, pause the video if you need to. And then we're going to talk about 5 key things: heaven and hell, God's will, the church, priests, and the payment of tithes. So heaven and hell. Now people believed in heaven and hell. If you were good, you went to heaven, and if you were bad, you went to hell. So make sure you've put that in your notes, please. Don't forget, pause the video if you need to. Then we need to think about this idea of God's will. Now people believe that it was God's will depending what happened. If it rained and the crops didn't grow, it was God's will. If it was sunny and the ground was scorched, it was God's will. If you were ill, it was God's will. Quite often that would be a punishment for you not being good. God's will was really important in medieval times, and everything that happened was God's will. Now the next point we're going to look at, the church was the heart of the village. In a moment we're going to look at the different roles of the church. But it's important that you recognise it's the heart of the village. It was often the biggest building. It was made out of stone. It was the most impressive building. So it's important to recognise that. And then the priest. The priest was very important. He would be the social leader. He would quite often be the person who would guide the rest of the village. He would tell them if they'd been good. He would tell them if they'd been bad. And again, we'll have a look at the role of the priest when we look at these wider roles of the church. And then finally, the payment of tithes. So people had to give the local church 1/10 of all the food they grew. This was called the tithe. Now some people were unhappy about this, but they knew if they didn't pay it, they'd go to hell. Also, when they died, they had to give money to the priest. Quite often it would be their second best working animal that they would have to give to the priest. So it could be quite expensive, making sure you worshipped God and you went to heaven. So let's move on. Let's have a look at these functions of a medieval church and its priest. Now the first one is games, plays and fairs. The church was the centre of the village, so quite often if they had a summer fair, it would be in the area of the church. If they had plays, if they had events going on, it would often be around the area of the church. With the church being so important, it was also a meeting place. Everybody knew where the church was. So if they had an issue to discuss, if something needed to be talked about, the people would go to the church to have their meeting. People would baptize their children and they would go to church to do that, because baptizing a child would mean they've become part of the church, and that would make sure they got to go to heaven when they died, because people certainly didn't want to go to hell. Marriage was an important thing, so people would go to church to get married. Only a priest was allowed to marry people. Burying the dead was important. People believed if you were not buried by a priest and you weren't buried at church, you would go to hell. And so burying the dead was an important function of the church and the priest. Praying was also an important part of the church. People prayed, sometimes praying for good crops, praying for good weather, praying to be cured. Don't forget, God's will was really important, so people would pray to try and influence God's will. People would pray to make sure they went to heaven as well. Giving local news was important. This is way before the time of newspapers, radio and television, so people would often just get the news from church by meeting at church and getting the local news, and it would often be the priest who gave the local news. And finally, Bible teaching. Don't forget, the church is important, religion's important, but people cannot read or write. The only person who could do that would be the priest, and he would have the Bible, which would be written in Latin, and he would read it to people and he would tell them what it meant. So it was really important they went to church to listen to the priest and understand what he told them about the Bible. So there we have it. Check your notes. If you're not sure over anything, go back through the video, play it again and add to your notes. Because we've got an assignment now. Now what I want you to do is describe why the church was important in medieval times. I want you to use point, evidence, explain for the structure of your paragraphs. So I'm expecting more than one paragraph. And to answer this question, I've also given you a word wall. So we've got 12 words up there, which I want you to use in your answer. Try and use all 12 words. When you use them, underline them or highlight them so we can see where they are. Try and use all the words in your answer though. So there we have it. The role of the church and the priest in medieval times. If you've got any questions, send an email, ask on Teams. Other than that, have a good time. Thanks very much.